Hi everyone, my name is Christian Andersson. I live in Gothenburg and I'm an associated trainer at We Are Movement. So today I'm planning to elaborate a little bit about how do we interact with suppliers, or how do you as a supplier interact with a buyer in case that you do not do all the things yourself, but you rely on suppliers doing some parts of your system. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And I hope I can bring some practices and some reflections as well. So first, sorry, that now you don't see anything more, right? Yeah, you do. So we have something called Agile contracts, but to be honest, in all the situations where I worked, Agile contracts are really not that common. Sometimes you have something, but it's more like an ambition or a wish that these relationships should be based on agile principles. So I often end up in situation where, okay, we need to do something anyhow, but we don't have an agile contract with our supplier. So that's a common situation, for at least for me. So then we could look at this from different perspectives. You can look at it from the buyer perspective, and we can look at it from the supplier perspective. So I will start with looking a little bit from the buyer perspective here. So let's say that you are a buyer and you're engaging a supplier to deliver something to you, and that you take the initiative to say to that supplier that, hey, we would like you to join our SAFE events because we have decided to work according to some agile framework. So you ask your supplier to get involved in your daily work in the SAFE events. So then you could do that by asking them to join nicely. And according to me, some of them are just happy to be part of your train or your solution, to take part of that and say, yeah, we use the SAFE, we can work with that, no problem. Or yeah, more or less, we could do that. We just would like to learn. Can you help us can you help out in some cases here? So that's something that is happening quite a lot, I think. So, but I've actually been in this situation once. So I was representing the buyer. So we asked the supplier, okay, could you join us for our PI plannings or our SAFE events? And they said, yeah, let's see. We are quite a big organization here, and we have we have 7 solutions or something, and we have like 60 or 70 release trains. So why don't you join our PI planning instead? That was the common response to our question. So what do you do then? Then you need to have some other approach, and happily we can all apply that. We plan on cadence and release on demand. So that was the more or less the solution here, that we decided to do that. So depending on sizes and depending on how mature you are, you might find different ways of interaction between a supplier and buyer if you would like to invite to your events as a buyer. And for the record, this big supplier to the right here was actually working with all our competitor, was delivering to all our competitors as well. So it was a quite strange situation. Not strange, but it was strange when we invited them to the SAFE events. So looking at the other way around a little bit, if you take the supplier initiative instead. So imagine that we have a supplier working agile, but the buyer doesn't apply agile at all. So they are a newcomer. They don't apply agile or SAFE for that matter. So what you could do as a supplier then is to actually engage with the buyer before your PI planning or your planning event, asking the buyer or presenting the plan and what you would like to need from them in order to do your PI planning, because there is always a collaboration needed. So present what you need from the buyer in this case to be able to fulfill your plan for the next PI. And then you engage with the buyer again after the PI planning, telling them this is now our plan for the next PI. And this is also quite commonly used, I've seen. So it's quite straightforward, making the supplier step by step, having the buyer taking on the product owner role, owning the backlog. So if you succeed in that, that's a good evolution of this pattern, having the buyer as a product owner for this case. Sometimes it ends up in that the buyer doesn't really he might not be interested in being the product owner, or doesn't have the right background to take on that challenge. And in that case, you will end up in a situation where you don't have a product owner at the buyer, so you need to have a product owner proxy or something. I don't know what to call it, but you need to have that in order to make your own organization work in an efficient way. So a little bit of the general reflection for the other slides first. So suppliers, they supply a lot of different things. They might be, they always have something of value, of course, for the buyer. It could be that they have a specific domain knowledge. They have a product. They might have a patent or intellectual properties that they would like to provide. They can be very good in integration, so they're integrating things for you. They might have available capacity. That's more like hiring development resources from a supplier. That's commonly used as well. It might be a low-cost alternative. They might have components or a specific know-how that you would like to have. So depending on the value that you would like to get from the supplier, your collaboration with the supplier and between the buyer and supplier looks different depending on what you need. For instance, if you only need software development resources like available capacity, I mean, you bring them in and put them in your trains. But if you would like to have to buy some products or components based on some IP or domain knowledge, you might get a component delivery instead, and not people in your own trains. So that's different what you're buying. So this is a case, a real example. In this case, there is an art at the buyer. You have multiple suppliers delivering to that art, and those suppliers, you can say that they have domain knowledge, they have some IP, they have some know-how that is valuable, and that's why they are chosen as suppliers as well. So inviting all these suppliers to the same PI planning and having them working together with the buyer in an open, transparent way at the PI planning at the buyer facilities will not be very successful, and it will not happen because those suppliers are actually, or might very well be, competitors as well. So that's a tricky situation. So this is something that could be applied in that case. So to the very left, there is an event, or you may have an event before the PI planning where the supplier has actually done a planning for the next PI, including what is needed from the buyer in order to be able to fulfill these for the next PI. So there are certain needs from the supplier that needs to be fulfilled. And that idea is to bring those needs into the PI planning at the buyer and then follow up after the PI planning if all the needs are fulfilled. And if all the needs are fulfilled, that's one way to actually syncing the plans in a way where not all the suppliers are actively participating in all the PI plannings due to that they are actually competitors. So this is one way of doing that, and I've been in several situations where I've applied this, and I can recommend it. It works, and it's a good way of getting alignment on what should be done, even across the border of one buyer and several suppliers in this case. So looking as well as the supplier-buyer interaction. So many companies and organizations, we do have strategies for when do we use suppliers. We can call it a make or buy strategy. Some parts are business critical. We would like to develop them ourselves. And some things we would like to buy from suppliers because it's easier, or that's a domain knowledge that is not critical for our business and so on. That's normally what goes into a make or buy strategy. And here I would like to bring forward a little bit about the team topologies, because team topologies has two sides, and the make and buy strategy, it often only the make and buy strategy is what we buy. We might buy from suppliers, we might buy complicated subsystems, because that's one thing that is quite common from a supplier to providing that value. Platforms or other things, that's common, and suppliers have the value and the knowledge of doing these things, so that's what we're buying. But I think there is a point in also considering how do we interact with those buyers? How do we work together with the suppliers in this case? So if there is a strong collaboration need between a supplier and buyer, we need more or less to interact daily or very heavily, and that might be troublesome across the board of the buyer and supplier in some cases. But on the other hand, if you identify interfaces, or you're buying things that is only requiring access to service interface interaction, then there is not that frequent collaboration needed, or frequent interaction needed. So that might be a better situation or a better interaction between a supplier and buyer if we could identify access to service interfaces rather than collaboration interfaces. But often in a make and buy strategy, you don't see in what way should we interact with the supplier. So if we have a make or buy strategy, including in what way we should interact with the suppliers, that will be a potential increase of our flow, because when you're working with suppliers, the flow is, or the value is created in the combination of what you have yourself together with what the supplier delivers to you. So take that into account, is my experience. How do you interact with the suppliers? and have a strategy for that as well. So this is what I intended to present. You can have buyer and supplier initiatives for working agile across the borders, and think about how do you interact with the supplier and not only what do you buy. Thank you.